RFK Jr. RFK Jr.'s hearing is this week on Wednesday. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s hearing is coming up soon. And I only said that twice because I wanted to clip this video clip. And many people are critical of RFK Jr. They, of course, can find in his voluminous writings something he said that doesn't sound perfect today. It's easy to find. I saw somebody criticize an article we published in Sensible Medicine. This is my friend Dr. Mike, who's a YouTuber as well. Dr. Mike said that the author of your article admits, I've not read everything RFK Jr. has said on this topic. And Mike said, you really got to read everything he said if you're going to weigh in on the issue. But to which I said, reading everything RFK Jr. said is like reading the whole Bible. You can still be a Christian even if you haven't read the whole Bible. I mean, it's asking too much. The man has written too much. I can't keep track of everything he said. You can just read a lot of what he said, but you can't read everything what he said. He's written too many things, and he's given too many interviews. I can't keep track of it all. But the people are critical of RFK Jr. because he said some things that, and I fact-checked him for Barry Weiss in the Free Press, and I don't agree. I do think HIV is the cause of AIDS, okay? It is a necessary cause of AIDS. I do think that Wi-Fi probably doesn't cause cancer. At the same time, a lot of people were like, Wi-Fi doesn't cause cancer. But also, I will want to keep it on the other side of the house. I don't want it on my nightstand, but I'm pretty confident that those radio frequency waves don't cause cancer. When it comes to the pesticides and the pollutants and things in our food, I'm on his side. I think a lot of those do need to be yanked. When it comes to raw milk, I personally am not going to drink it, but I also agree with him that it is permitted for sale in European countries, so we ought to let people do what they want to do on it. It's not something that government should involve themselves with. On fluoride, I'm kind of torn on the issue. I don't think fluoride has benefits in the modern world, and if they want to pull it from the water supply, it's fine with me. I'm supportive of pulling fluoride from the water supply. I don't think it's a big deal. On vaccines, I 100% agree with him that we have a system that's broken and you cannot detect the full safety signals of vaccines, and we need to reform that. I think where we disagree is that it's easy to cling to low-quality anecdotal reports and have all this kind of fear about what vaccines might be doing. I would say let's create the system where we can detect every single safety signal, which we do not have. We have a very broken system. Create that system and then just let it speak for itself. It will find safety problems. It will find a lot of safety problems. I think the COVID vaccine is not going to do well. It's going to find a lot of safety problems, and then let that data just speak for itself. You will damn everyone if he created such a system, and I think he can do it. Now, people don't want him in power, and they have all sorts of things. I saw that one of his cousins, I think it's the grandson or great-grandson of John F. Kennedy, Jack, what's his name, Schlesinger? I may mispronounce it. I apologize. He said something like, all of my cousins got stories about Bobby Kennedy. They don't want to come forward with those stories. I'm like, you know what we don't need? We don't need stories about his life, personal life. It has nothing to do with his job. I don't care if he caught a bear in a trap and put a whale on the top of his car. I don't really care about that stuff. That's not relevant to me. American medicine is in crisis. We spend 20% of GDP on healthcare. We have health outcomes far worse than peer nations, and we're spending double what they spend. We are in a free fall. We need somebody who's willing to go there and change things, not a status quo person. We need a drastic reformation. You need to go in there with a sledgehammer and start taking out walls in this gut rehab job. It is a gut renovation. It is not changing the paint, okay? That's what every other HHS administrator has done. You need somebody who actually wants to do something substantive. It is an abject failure, American healthcare, okay? This is a guy who's coming in. And if you want to tell me that he has some story about when he went kite surfing, I don't give a shit. It has nothing to do with his on-the-job performance. That's 1.2. It's very poor form to take a crap on your family member when they're facing a difficulty in life. There's the classic thing about a family member. When you have something nice to say it. And when you don't have something nice to say, just be quiet. That's the next point. The third point is unless the cousins are health policy experts, I don't see why their opinion matters to me on this topic at all. I'm a health policy expert. I've been doing it for 15, 20 years. So I'm much more confident in my opinion on these matters than any of the family. I just think it speaks very poorly when you start to threaten about coming out and these kinds of stories. But I suspect during the hearings, we're going to hear a lot of that. Now, this is the point. I'm winding up to the point I really want to make, which is I ask anyone who doesn't like this guy for whatever reason as HHS secretary to ask yourself this question. If it is not RFK Jr. this week, if it's not him, if he gets shot down, if Murkowski flips or a few of these other, and McConnell flips, a few of these votes flip, and if Fetterman doesn't come through and Bernie doesn't come through, if it's not him, who is it going to be? It is not going to be someone who cares about child nutrition but doesn't say those things about HIV. It's not going to be somebody who cares about all of the artificial colorings and flavors and the processed food, but who didn't have his view on Wi-Fi. It's going to be someone who doesn't care about any of these views, who's a self-aggrandizing status quo piece of shit. person who, it's full. Washington is full of these piece of shit people. Scott Gottlieb, classic example. He went to FDA commissioner. He lowered the regulatory bar for Lartruvo. It blew up in his face. People don't even understand this, like how it blew up in his face. I'll just explain for 1 minute. There's a provision in the FDA called accelerated approval. It gives the FDA the ability to approve for serious, life-threatening, rare diseases with few treatment options where there's, quote, an unmet medical need. You're allowed to provisionally make available promising drugs with the hopes there is a confirmatory study down the road to see if they really do what we think they do, help people live longer and better lives. Accelerated approval is often granted on the basis of a surrogate or stand-in endpoint, a biomarker, something you can measure and test, but not something that's a direct measure of how someone lives and how long they live or how well they live. That's called a surrogate endpoint. And the guidelines for accelerated approval was a statistically persuasive effect on a surrogate endpoint is the grounds for accelerated approval. Well, this genius, Scott Gottlieb, he changed that. He said, instead of a statistically persuasive effect on an uncertain endpoint, why don't we also accept a statistically unpersuasive effect on a clinical endpoint like survival? And he approved a drug called Lartruvo that had a very fishy OS benefit that was not the primary endpoint of the study, an underpowered phase 2 study, but it was statistically unpersuasive. It wasn't a pre-specified endpoint, so it wasn't, strictly speaking, significant in the way the FDA wants it to be, but it was a clinical endpoint. So he says, instead of a persuasive effect on a surrogate endpoint, how about an unpersuasive effect on a clinical endpoint? Let's expand accelerated approval. And he did. But the reason why it's so stupid is that unpersuasive effects on clinical endpoints are a dime a dozen. If you start to accept that, if I were the drug maker, I would take my shitty drug and I would run 100 randomized trials of 4 people, 2 in each arm. And by chance alone, and I'll run them in 100 different diseases. And by chance alone, some of these will have spurious, statistically uncertain effects on survival. Because these 2 people live longer than these 2 people. I just happen to pick Tom and Bill, and they did better than Bobby and Mary. So it's a positive study. It's not statistically pure, but it looks like a big benefit, and I'll just start approving drugs willy-nilly. Whereas a statistically persuasive effect on a biomarker, you can't just run 1 million studies and get spurious values. You still need drugs that actually change biomarkers. Scott Gottlieb couldn't even understand this. I don't even think he knows. I suspect he doesn't know that much about medicine from his regulations and his comments. Then he does it. The phase 3 is stone cold negative. The survival is completely identical. It's withdrawn from the market. It blows up in his face. Nobody knows that it blew up in his face and that he was the one pushing this stupid policy. And then he goes to be on the board of directors of Pfizer, stuffing his own pockets with pharma cash like all these sellout shills who hold these positions. And then he pushes against Berenson and others who are critical of mRNA vaccines to mandate his product and silence people who are critical of his product. Even truthful criticism of mRNA vaccines that didn't fit their narrative, he and others lobbied to suppress. And that's coming out in Berenson versus Biden, the ongoing court case. That's what you're going to get. So yeah, of course, Robert Kennedy Jr. has not said everything to my standards. Of course, nobody does, because I'm an evidence-based purist in many ways. Side note. Occasionally, some people comment that you're an evidence-based purist when it comes from randomized controlled trials, but from harms of red dye 3, you don't ask for randomized trials. I've explained in a prior video why it's they who are inconsistent, and I am consistent about drugs that have purported efficacy versus compounds that have no claims of efficacy, and the claims and the standard to know that they may be harmful. Go check that prior video out. But I'm an evidence-based purist, okay? I've always been, and I always will be. Side note number 2. I recently was on Twitter and somebody was saying that I'm critical of animal research. I think that if it's absolutely necessary, we should do. But if you're injecting mice with cancer drugs and it turns out that like the study in mice has nothing to do with the person, you might start to ask yourself, well, why are you torturing the mice? I mean, if you're learning from the mice, sure. But if you're not learning from the mouse, if the drugs that work in mice don't work in people, and the drugs that don't work in mice might work in people, we actually don't test that pathway too often, by the way, it's unexplored, then why are we testing these things in mice? And the answer is that's true. There's so much animal research where we don't know the test characteristics of animal research as a filter for moving drugs forward, and we're just abusing monkeys and dogs, like Fauci and the beagles, that abusive study. We're abusing mice. And then this journalist wrote in my comments that it's strange to see you, someone on the right, being critical of animal research, because that typically was a left cause. I said, look, I don't define myself in political terms. I've held certain views since I was about 26, 27, and this view was one of those views. Other views I've held is that we should do right by children, particularly poor children, and society should take care of poor children. Then the progressives came along and said, how about we close their schools for 2 years? And I said no. So apparently that puts me on the right. I like to think that puts me on the side of basic decency and common sense and not being a fucking moron. That's what I think. And it's they, not me, who have shifted because they were so scared that these kids would get them sick in their upper middle class houses, whereas I was the consistent one concerned about the plight of children who go to public schools. They were happy to send their kids to private schools while they closed your kid's school. I was the one who objected. So my principles have been the same since I was about 26, 27. That was about the age in which I gelled my worldview. I've been the same. And the political parties have moved a lot. Long time ago, the party that took all the money from pharma was the Republicans, and the Democrats were the ones critical of pharma. That switched entirely. In the last presidential cycle, Kamala got more pharma support after Joe Biden decided to be Pfizer's sugar daddy and give them billions of dollars for useless drug product Paxlovid. And his shill, Ashish Jha, would say things like, Paxlovid, you definitely need it. God gave you 2 arms, one for your flu shot, one for your booster, and all the while not generating randomized controlled trial evidence of these claims. So back to RFK. RFK Jr., if it's not RFK Jr., it's going to be more of the same. And nobody wants more of the same. American medicine needs someone to go in there with a baby sledgehammer, not a wrecking ball, a baby sledge, but start taking some walls out. You can't go in there with a little paint roller and then a paint roller and then just sit around. When am I going to get my check from Pfizer? Should I join the board of directors of GlaxoSmithKline or Gilead? No, we don't want those shill people. You want someone who's going to go in there with a baby sledge. Now, Bobby's going to go into the baby sledge. He's going to take out that ugly countertop. He's going to knock out that wall. Is he accidentally going to ding the clawfoot bathtub? I don't know. Maybe, but it's okay. You know, we need some gut rehab here. We can't live like this anymore. And if he dings the clawfoot bathtub, we can try to fix it. And maybe we can try to protect it with some different rules around him. That's my view. And I ask them, who will it be? You don't want this guy. Name the person. And then they say, aren't there lots of people? Give me a name. Give me the name of the person you want. And they always choke. Why? Because usually they don't know anything about this topic, okay? They can't name the last 5 HHS secretaries. They don't follow health policy. They don't know who this guy is. They don't know what they're going to happen. And sometimes they name somebody, but it's a ludicrous suggestion. Oh, I think it should be. Insert the person. And I'm like, well, that person is not of this person's political party. They're in the other political party. And that's a person who's a junior person. That's a person who has this reason. There's a million reasons why Trump is not going to pick that person. So what the hell are you talking about? Be pragmatic. To me, what it really feels like is some people win an election, some people lose an election. It's a close country. It's like 49-47. Trump, wins the popular vote. It's a close country. And the people who lose, they don't want to say, well, we lost, so that guy won, so he gets to pick the person. They want to still poke at every little thing he does. But, in my mind, you lost. Just accept the first few things. I mean, just accept who he picks. Everyone knew he was going to pick RFK Jr. The guy endorsed him, was on stage with him. It's not a surprise. This was what people voted for. The majority of people voted for this guy, too. And if you don't like it, win the next election, okay? But shut up. And I don't want to hear about his whale on the top of his head and all these things. And focus on the policy. When it comes to policy, he's the only person who's going to do anything on children nutrition, on pesticides in our food, on dyes, on vaccine safety and drug safety. He's the only, there's no one else will do anything. I've never seen or heard anyone else say anything. People say, well, can't we find somebody who doesn't have a track record of his statements? That's because the people who want these jobs, these slimy, sellout people, they purposely do not ever have a track record. Their whole life, they try not to generate a track record, and they are willing to do whatever it takes for their own self-aggrandizement. And that, to me, is the Gottliebs of the world. And that, to me, is not him. I think for whether you like him or hate him, you have to admit that he is a true believer. All right. Eulogies.